Macbeth is a fascinating play in terms of how the men are portrayed and how masculinity is presented. Today we're going to start with Macbeth himself. The first thing to say is that Macbeth isn't evil because he is bloodthirsty and violent. In fact, those traits are positively praised at the beginning of the play. Look at how his exploits on the battlefield are described in Act 1, Scene 2. We're told that he rips the traitor MacDonald open from the nave to the chops. He's given the epithet Brave Macbeth, as if the quality is an inseparable part of his name or character. Bloodthirsty violence is commendable and celebrated when it's performed in the cause of good, to protect the king, and when it's enacted in the right place, the battlefield. It's a sign of the unnaturalness of Macbeth's actions that he takes these skills and tendencies and shifts them to the domestic sphere of his house, in killing his guest, the loyal, honest and admirable Duncan. So it's not so much what he does, but where and why he does it that shifts our opinion of Macbeth. Our noble hero's downfall begins when he begins to contemplate regicide, the killing of a king, an action that goes so completely against the Jacobean mindset, where the divine right of kings to rule was proclaimed by King James himself, the king, in 1606, when Macbeth was written and probably present at the first performance. As a tragic hero, we need to comment on Macbeth's tragic flaw, and this is commonly assumed to be his ambition. In fact, he's astute and perceptive enough to recognise this himself in his soliloquy in Act 1, Scene 7, when he says, "I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but vaulting ambition which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other." Ultimately, the only reason he would have to murder Duncan would be his ambition. But I think we can be a little bit more precise here. What Macbeth craves actually is approval. In fact, this is the reason he gives initially for not going ahead with the murder, saying, "He hath honoured me," talking of Duncan, "he hath honoured me of late, and I have bought golden opinions from all sorts of people, which will be worn now in their newest gloss, not cast aside so soon." He wants to revel in the glory, not jeopardise it. What changes his mind in the course of Act 1, Scene 7? Why does he go from saying, "We will proceed no further in this business," and sounding absolutely definite that he won't commit the murder, to saying by the end of the scene, "I am settled and bend up each corporal agent to this terrible feat"? It's fear. Fear of losing the approval of his wife. Notice Lady Macbeth's line of attack. She accuses him of not being a man. A man wouldn't go back on his word. A man wouldn't be afraid of the consequences. She actually accuses him of being a scaredy cat when she refers to him as the poor cat in the adage. In other words, a cat who sees some fish in a little pool of water but is too scared to get its feet wet. Are you prepared to get blood on your hands? She's basically saying. Have you got what it takes? I find it fascinating that Macbeth himself uses the same approach when he sets out to persuade the murderers to kill Banquo and Fleance for him. Notice the dog analogy that he uses to make his point. When one of the murderers declares himself a man, Macbeth says, "Aye, in the catalogue ye go for men, as hounds and greyhounds, mongrels, spaniels, curs, choughs, water rugs and demi-wolves are clept all by the name of dogs. What kind of men are you?" he's basically saying. In the same way that Lady Macbeth challenged his courage and whether he would stick to his word, Macbeth draws on stereotypically masculine characteristics too, when he brings up the idea that Banquo had been responsible for unfortunate occurrences in the men's lives in the past. It's all fabricated, of course, completely made up by Macbeth, but perfect from his point of view if you're trying to persuade a man to commit a murder. He tries to generate a sense of the men being entitled to revenge. In fact, to not seek revenge would be a sign of unmasculine weakness. To really comment on Macbeth's masculinity, though, of course, we'll need to look at other characters in the play. And here Shakespeare is obviously very keen to use contrast. He juxtaposes Macbeth's flawed masculinity with examples of admirable nobility. Duncan, for instance, a king so good and pure that if he's murdered, we're told his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued against the deep damnation of his taking off. That's in Act 1, Scene 7. In a play written and produced a year after the Gunpowder Plot, Shakespeare's sycophantic reference to King James as the potential victim of the previous year is obvious here. There's Banquo too. In history, he was actually an ancestor of King James, leading to his positive portrayal in the play as a much more cautious, level-headed, rational character than his impulsive friend Macbeth. Finally, Macduff, loyal to his country with the integrity not to attend Macbeth's coronation, and confident enough in his masculinity to allow himself time to grieve when he discovers that his wife and all his children have been murdered. In Macduff, we see that being a man is about courage, loyalty, devotion, and compassion. What a contrast to Lady Macbeth's concept of masculinity when she says, "Unsex me here and fill me from the crown to the toe top full of direst cruelty." It's not cruelty that makes a man, Shakespeare is saying, but sacrifice, nobility, and integrity.